Welcome to Mucho TV, where we learn from one another and grow. My name is Janvier Nahimana. I'm with my co-host Camila. Our special guest today is Asa Kachan, the CEO for Halifax Libraries. Welcome on Mucho TV. How are you doing today?
Great. I'm great. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for this conversation we're going to have today. By day, I'm a librarian. Actually, by night, I'm a librarian too. But I also live in this community. So I was drawn to being the CEO of the public library because I wanted to create the kind of community that my family lives in, and I wanted to make sure that it was a place where people arrived in Halifax and they wanted to build a life here and they wanted to connect with their neighbors and reach out. And so, I'm somebody who is driven by purpose. I am somebody who cares deeply, deeply for my family and for my community. I'm also somebody who's a little bit of a rebel, so not always visible when you see my face, but those who are close to me know that I will often question the status quo. And somebody says, well, that's the way it is. My first question might be, and why is that? And so I'm pretty adventuresome. When I'm not working, I might be riding my bike. I might be working in my garden. I might be, doing things with my children who are now adults. But I embrace life. I embrace our community.
Discuss about the impact of COVID-19 to community services. Black Lives Matter.
I have a couple of questions regarding, Black Lives Matters and COVID, but essentially the library has been like a huge safe space for a lot of different minorities, homeless people that go to the library all the time. With the library's closures, what has the library done to help these communities that have been most affected by the closures themselves?
Yeah. So you raise a really good point, because people will sometimes say, well, COVID, we're all in this together, but in fact, the impact of COVID on our community has not been uniform. And people who have a safe place to live, or people who have, internet access, or can afford a Netflix account, or can download their own books, they are infinitely better positioned to navigate. So when COVID hit and we had to close our libraries really quickly, that was the piece that woke me up in the morning, and I said, this is really problematic. We know the people who rely on us as a resource. We know that they still need us. That need has not disappeared. So our response with particular care to that community it happened in a few different ways. So certainly we immediately did things that would allow people to access our electronic resources. So that was the first piece. And then we looked to see who in the community does that not serve. So we reached out to community partners. We knew that there were a number of additional shelters being established that could allow people who are part of the shelter system right now to spread out in a safer way. We also knew that there were individuals who had been incarcerated who were going to be released into the community as a safety measure. And we knew that people then would congregate in places that weren't particularly well set up to keep people entertained all day, right? So you imagine you're moving into a new setting, there's no infrastructure. So we reached out to organizations and said, can we help you? Can we get you a Wi-Fi hotspot? Can we lend you, we have lots of things inside our libraries like iPads and Chromebooks and gaming systems. And from my perspective, all of those things belong to the people. They don't belong to me, and they don't belong to the librarians. So we reached out and actually took a whole bunch of those things, including books and other materials and technology, and moved those out into the locations where we thought the community could use some extra help. Understanding that those things like an iPad is really important for somebody to reconnect with family, to build their support network, and they would have typically come into the library to use those for free, and so let's move them to the people where they need them. We reached out to youth homes, so group homes that house lots of youth, and said, what else do you need to help keep everybody happy and occupied? And then we did a few other things. We know that people in our community do not have equitable access to internet. So, in my perfect world, internet will be like safe drinking water. It'll be a basic amenity. What we have is a government and a community that relies on the internet for information provision. So you think about the information about COVID-19, how to stay healthy, where the resources are. Much of that information is available online. And then if you have people who can't get online because they don't have Wi-Fi or internet access, that's a problem because they're not getting the information they need. So in our branches, we always have free Wi-Fi, and we always leave it on all night, but we did a big campaign to promote that to people. And we actually, our IT staff, I called them my superheroes. They went in and they put little boosters in the corner to sort of push out that free Wi-Fi as far as it could reach, because we wanted people to have access to the Wi-Fi, to get the good health information, to download our electronic resources. But we also knew that, we didn't want them to congregate. So the further we could to the community, the better. So then we also knew that there were going to be challenges for families of young children. So that was the other thing. My children are adults now. The youngest one just turned 18. But I remember what it was like to have little ones. And my worry was for people who were now isolated in their homes. So we had a great team of children's librarians creating activity packs. So we created snack packs and said, here completely for free, are activity packages that'll keep your kids occupied with interesting puzzles and games and things to learn. We would throw in pencil crayons and crayons, and then we'd send food packs. And then some practical things. We have offered free menstrual products through our branches for the last year. And I know people rely on us for that as well. And so very shortly after we closed, I connected to the United Way and said, you have a network of agencies that are reaching out to people who are vulnerable in the community. We've got all this stock, and it's not going to get to the people who need it. So can we give it to you? Can you distribute it through your community organizations? Let's keep caring for the community, even if they can cross the door or cross the threshold to get in the door. So that is a long list of many things that we've been doing. And then, of course, online programming was important as well. Passing the day is difficult, and COVID was lonely for many, many people. So we had online story time where people could tune in with their kids and listen to the next chapter of Anne of Green Gables, or they could do crafts. We set up an Ask the Library phone line so that people who would come into our library to ask a question could call us to ask the question. And sometimes they called us just to talk, and sometimes we arranged to call them back in a few days just to check in. It is trying to, in a way, although we're an institution, trying to be less bureaucratic and more human as an organization. And that's how we lift up people. As time went on, it also became clear people needed access to toilets and running water to wash their hands. So anybody who's walked past our central library will notice that we have outdoor toilets, and we have staff there who are handing out snack packs and just checking in on the people we have always checked in on in our community.
Which is really interesting that you mention all of that, because when I think about a library, this concept of library, I was reading about the platform of the library yesterday, and you actually put the library as a non-profit organization and that helps the community. And I would have never thought that, because back home, a library is just a place where you go, sit down to your homework, you take out books, but you don't have that community engagement. So the fact that we have someone here that is actually looking out for people is quite amazing. And I do see what you guys have done. Like, I've noticed the bathrooms, and my mom also works at the library. She has been at North, she has been at Kachan, and she has been at Central. And there's been a lot of people that have been laid off, and I think like the hardest part for my mom is the fact that she has not been able to contribute to the community as much as she's been. And it's amazing to hear you say that. Yeah.
Your comment about caring for the community, I think that's been so hard for so many of us. And, I've talked about the things the library does, but of course behind that are the people of the library who do that work and who are drawn to work at the library, like your mother, who are drawn to work here because we care about the library and the people who we connect with every day. And it's not always evident to the public. One of my staff wrote to me shortly after we closed, and she said, the thing that makes me most sad is there was a member of the community in my neighborhood where I work who was has struggled with alcoholism, and he's been trying to stay sober. And I was part of his plan. He was going to check in with me every day for 90 days and drop by and let me know that he was sober for one more day. And so it is the human connection that sits at the heart of everything that the library does. And of course, we have the materials and the internet, but in the absence of the heart, and there are many beating hearts in the library, mine is one of them, but all the people who work at the library are drawn to it for similar reasons, that it is in those human connections that we actually build the kind of community that we want.
Yeah, 100%. And then with that being said, that kind of ties into my next question. Do you have any plans of opening the library soon? And with that, like, how are you going to ensure the safety of the patrons that come to the library? Like, what kind of cleaning policies do you have in terms of the books or the things people are going to be touching, plus how are you going to ensure social distance?
So that's such a good question, and I promise you that has consumed in the moments when I haven't been worrying about the people, I've been worrying about how we build a new library, because you're right. In the very beginning, I was sad because I thought, we have come so far in creating this culture of sharing, and it's so important for us to share to reduce our environmental footprint. And and then I realized, with COVID, I thought, what if sharing starts to feel dangerous, and what if being together is dangerous, and then how do we go from being the safest place to the most dangerous place? And it would be terrible. So that was my panic the first day, and then we started working out the details. And I will say, over the past few months, we have learned every week we learn new things about how the virus spreads and how it doesn't spread, and that has informed our approach. So you will, over the course of the next 2 weeks, our branches are going to be opening, so that's big news. But we're doing things on the inside that are preparing us for that. So what we do know is the virus does not live long on materials. So the sharing of the items isn't as big a problem as we initially thought. I think what we know for sure is that the key is hand washing and not touching our faces. So if we as a society, because the virus will be somewhere, right? It might be on a door handle. I mean, we will wipe those down a lot. But at the heart of it for us all to stay safe is to presume that we've touched something that has the virus, and then wash our hands regularly and not touch our faces, because that's how it gets introduced. So we have lots of hand washing stations, lots of hand sanitizer. We're stretching out our computer workstations because they were often very close together. And so those you will see stretched out a little further apart from each other. We will have protocols, so when somebody goes to a computer, they will be instructed to wipe it down when they arrive, use it, wipe it down when they're done. The next person comes along, wipe it down before they use it, wipe it down when they're done. Our approach is really about, just like we share the library with the public and it belongs to all of us, we share the responsibility for keeping us safe with the public. So our chairs, you'll notice they'll be grouped differently. They will be stretched out a bit further. But one of the things I want people to still feel is welcome, because we do need to be with each other. We do need the human connection. And I think we can find that balance. And I've already noticed, I'm a real observer of human beings. And so I've noticed, how people walk through the grocery store, and that mostly people will respect the directions. They will respect, the distance markers. So you'll see those kinds of things within the library. But I have a lot of trust in my public. I think one of the things that we've done at the library is we've given more and more trust over to the people. So if you think back to before Central Library opened, the rule was no food at all in the library. It was going to be terrible. It would be too dangerous. We would get things sticky and things would spill and it would be a mess and there'd be rodents, all the things people worried about. But the public said to us, no, please let us bring in a cup of coffee. Please let us bring in food. And so we trusted the people, and the people didn't let us down. So I do feel predisposed to believing that we can work well together and be harmonious. There will be things that are missing. I don't know if you ever were at the library for any of the big sing gatherings in Paul O'Regan Hall. I loved having 250 people in Paul O'Regan Hall singing songs together as a community. I don't think we can do that safely. I know singing in close proximity is not a great thing at the moment, but maybe outside we can sing together. We're developing our outdoor spaces. You'll see more outdoor furniture, more opportunities to take that iPad you might borrow in the library and go outside with it. Take it for the day and use it in a public space, but in the outside. I think the idea is, we will continue to pay attention to what is safe for our community, and then we'll figure out a way for the library to fit into that safety framework. And that might require us to continue to change some rules, but we can do that. We have lots of experience doing that. So I'm optimistic, and honestly, for all of us who work at the library, we have lots of safety protocols for the staff as well. You're going to see people standing around the library, monitoring the direction people take, but we're going to do that with a lot of care and a lot of smiles, and it is going to, it will be still a welcoming place, even if it has some other patterns of, behavior and movement. So I can't wait. Honestly, it's been a long, lonely, period of time without our public in our spaces.
I bet, and I feel a lot of people miss it, especially like families that go into all the activities, all the children that go play, and all the activities that you guys hold for people, the community events. It's going to be interesting to see that transition that is going to be from us being able to go to those concerts and being able to showcase culture and having to move it more digital or outside, like you were saying. I'm actually looking forward to see what that's going to look like, because part of what the library means to me is being able to share my culture, and I feel Janvier can probably relate to that. There's a lot of Black activities constantly done. You had a concert for the African American, like we have in October. For the death of her too, so I'm really excited to see what you're going to do with that.
Yeah, I think the programming is probably our trickiest part, because programming was often about gathering people into a single space. But certainly the virtual programming is fun. We're doing some interesting things online that actually may reach people who couldn't make it into our buildings. So the idea to be part of a book club or to be part of a knitting club, we can do those things inside a room in the library, and we can also do that using platforms like Zoom. So, our objective as a library has not changed. It continues to be to bring our community together. It continues to be to support our community thriving. That remains unchanged. And so for us now, it's trying to figure out, okay, so how do we adjust how we achieve that? But it doesn't change our purpose as an organization. So these are interesting times. As much as some of the days have been absolutely exhausting, it is one of the most interesting times for me professionally and for our society to remember what matters most to us, to sift and sort through things, to find new ways to solve problems. It will be very interesting to me to think into the future about this moment in history. How has this changed us for forever? Because of course, a big disruption like this, it changes our values, it changes our priorities. So independent of being in the middle of it, I'm kind of finding it interesting to observe it as well, as a big driver of community change.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
You, as mom, the impact of COVID-19, it has been really tremendous in families. So how did you manage this time? That's to be a mom with kids at home, and also the stress that we get from not going outside, not get a place where a kid can play. How did you manage this time for COVID-19 as mom?
Yeah. Well, I had a bit of a complicated time frame around COVID-19 because when COVID-19 hit, we were actually away. Our youngest was graduating from high school, so we were on a little trip with some of his classmates and parents, and so we arrived home, and I needed to immediately not only run a library but be in quarantine because somebody who was on our trip had tested positive. So there was a lot of going on in the background. But you know what? Zoom amazing, and we shifted gears on how I could still run a library from my house. But my children are a little bit older, so our youngest one was still at home, and then we had one in Montreal and one in Toronto. And my great worry for them was their degree of isolation in a city that wasn't their home, and the middle one actually had come home for March break from university and never went back. She just stayed home and is still home. And the oldest one, who's young in her career, found her way back to us for about 5 or 6 weeks because of it was lonely to be in a big city by herself trying to work from home. So for us, actually, it ended up being a bit of a gift, because when your children grow up and move on, you don't imagine you'll actually all have time together under the same roof again, other than maybe over a holiday for a week or something. So to actually have us all back together again really felt pretty lovely. But I had another stress going on. My father wasn't well, and my parents were far away, and I had always imagined I could get on an airplane whenever I needed to and be where they are within about 5 hours, and that stopped being possible. So I did end up going to spend a week with my father, but 2 weeks quarantine when I got there before I could visit them so that I wouldn't make him ill. And then when I came back, 2 weeks quarantine again because I had been out of province. So all this was going on in the background, and then so two things are interesting about that. One is it realized that the things that were simple, that we thought would always be simple or become even more simple, sometimes can become more complicated. But the big part was I could actually, as it turned out, run the library either from the library, from my house, or from my parents' home several provinces away. I actually, with the time change, I would get up at 5 a.m. and start doing my job, and then by 3 p.m, I was done, and then we would have the rest of the day to spend. I would have the rest of the day to spend with my parents. So I don't think it was even noticeable to a lot of people that I had jumped between provinces. It's a complicated time. And those are all things that bring with them a lot of weight and a lot of stress. But again, something like COVID, actually, it sort of peels away all the unnecessary things and does get you to the heart of what matters most, whether that's your community or whether that's in your family. There is a distilling of emotion to the ones that are absolutely at the heart. And that is true in many of the issues that have arisen in our community, that we trim away the fine language and we call things for what they are because it's important, and we need to pay attention to the things that matter the most.
How was it to take care of yourself while you were, handling so many different things, doing quarantine for 2 weeks, managing the library, taking care of your family? Like, how do you take care of yourself? Because I feel that's an important piece, especially as a mom. That's hard sometimes. So how do you do that?
Well, you know what? I've had a lot of years to practice this. So I do feel like I'm better at it than if you talked to me 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. It's taking time to sleep, making sure I sleep well. It's making sure I eat well. For me, there's great pleasure in sharing a meal, and so I enjoyed cooking and baking, and the exercise was tough because I'm used to a high level of exercise in my day, and when you can't actually leave the house but to go out into the yard, That's challenging. Although my husband, who also loves lots of exercise, when we were in quarantine, he ran 10 kilometers in a circle in the backyard. He would run around the backyard and then down to the end of the driveway and back. So you do what you can. But connecting with people, I feel, I really get a lot of energy from the people who matter, and I really cherished the family Zoom calls where I would check in. We would get our extended family on Zoom, and I'd hear what my nieces and nephews are doing across the country, and those are those moments where you feel a little bit less lonely, and you can actually connect. So you sort of just dig in and do what you have to do. I think it's my parents are in their 80s, and my father, who was 87, he was a child in Innsbruck during World War II, and it was an area that was heavily bombed, and there was no food, and it was tremendously dangerous. And even as a young school child, they would take the children out of the school and run them up into an old mine, like an old silver mine, to keep the children safe from the bombing. And so, we have had, in my generation, we have had very little, relatively, a very little sort of inherent tragedy that we've had to survive. And so I look to him. I look to people who, refugees who come through horrific situations, and that helps me put, a little bit of discomfort and loneliness and, feeling a little bit, imprisoned in my home, kind of puts that into really quick perspective, because, there are lots of dangerous things in the world. This is inconvenient for me, but I don't forget, the privilege I have to have a home and to I can weather this, I guess, is my point. And it is often about putting it into perspective, so I don't feel too sorry for myself.
No, 100%. Like, I agree with you 100%. I think the fact that we have a job, a family, we have a way to be safe, is definitely a privilege compared to a lot of people around the world.
Yeah.
And even in our community, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
So let's shift a little bit towards the Black Lives Matter movement. This is obviously like a difficult topic for all of us to talk. And as not Black people, I feel like a couple questions that I wanted to ask you was, what is the library doing to help the Black community now, and what is the library going to be doing moving forward? Because how can we have these safe conversations that we need to have? They're so important matters, and they're very challenging. A lot of people are going to be very uncomfortable having this conversation, but like what we said already, the library is a safe space for all of us to have this conversation. So how can we have them, and what can the library do to offer that space?
So, that's a really good question, and it's something we've been talking a lot about within the library community. In fact, I sit on a national group called the Canadian Urban Libraries Council, and we've talked a lot about racial and social inclusion as being fundamental to the role of libraries. And if I think of public libraries as again promoting a thriving society, the truth is, until everybody feels dignity and feels respect and is included and has a life rich in opportunity, our work is not done on this. This is not about, we're going to work really hard on this for a short period of time and then it'll all be good, because it won't be. We need to acknowledge systemic racism within all of our institutions, including mine, and really begin to unwrap and unravel how the structure that has built us, and we need to, as a public library, then think about how do we help to amplify the voices for people who are outside that circle. I talked about the circle, reaching out. Who's on the outside? Because that's not okay, and we need to figure out how we reach out. I think you also talked about community conversations as being really important. One of the things that I love a lot of things about technology, but one of the things about technology that concerns me profoundly when it relates to sort of how it shapes our society is the way in which online content is is the way the algorithms work that promote online content. So, for example, if you search for something, you'll get lots of answers back, but the ones that are on the top of the list often have to do with your perspective or the way that the things that you searched before. So, for example, if you tend to think more sort of left-leaning politically versus right-leaning, you're actually going to get information back, and you're going to get articles promoted and that actually reflect the perspective you already hold. And that's really concerning because, in fact, for us to have a strong democracy and for us to make good decisions as a society, we can't just all sit in our bubble and have the same information fed back to us that we already presumed was true. We actually need that challenge, we need that debate, and we need to hear the perspectives of others instead of having our own perspective reflected back to us. So libraries are really important places for that to happen. So it's a place where, you know, we can have a topic, and there have been many of these. African Heritage Month, we've had many conversations, and they're painful and they're difficult, but they're critically important if we're going to build the sort of human understanding that we need within our society. So the role of the library as a convener and as a facilitator of those kinds of conversations, absolutely important. The way we can engage and lift people up, if we look at things like incarceration, literacy rates, access to education, people who are Black and Indigenous and people of color are disproportionately negatively affected by things like the criminal justice system, and have less access to higher education and technology and internet access. And so the impact of poverty is much greater on people who are Black and Indigenous and people of color. So if we know that at the library, then how do we then focus our energy on saying, okay, so how do we make that access available through the library to equalize some of those disparities? So that's a big piece of it. I also think as a library system, as an organization that is publicly funded, we also need to work really hard to create an environment of diversity and inclusion within our library and within our community. So, how do we hire? How do we reflect our community? We've been putting tremendous effort toward that, looking at our hiring practices. If we have people within our organization, how do we created a bursary program a few years ago to support individuals within the library with a particular eye to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, to support their education, to move them into leadership positions. We've been looking at our competencies as a library, and we used to be very, very focused on competencies in terms of people who would work within the library and who could move into leadership roles. We had a big focus on competencies that Black people had less access to. So, master's degrees are a wonderful thing, but they're not easily available to people for a whole variety of reasons. And so if that became the requirement to even take on a leadership role, how will we ever reflect our community? So we've begun to change how we hire, to look at things like deep community connections are also really important to us being able to serve our community. And what is somebody's lived experience? And if somebody has a lived experience as somebody who has felt racialized, or somebody who's come through difficult life circumstances, that's really important in the library too, because the lens that person brings and the care they can bring and provide to the community will be different than what I might bring. And so the idea of diversifying our organization with intention is very, very important to us at the moment. So, and even our rules. So if we think about some of the library rules, you notice we've been waiving fines much more often. Fines are a really interesting thing, because we used to think charging people fines at the library was us being responsible with taxpayer dollars. We're going to make that person bring that book back. We are going to penalize them if they don't, and that's going to make them, a better citizen. In fact, withholding access to the public library has a profoundly greater impact on people who are living in poverty, or people whose lives are complicated. And the truth is, if somebody's a single parent, it's going to be a lot harder to get the books back on time. And so we're beginning to say, even some of those basic library rules are actually discriminatory and even racist in their foundation, because they fail to understand the impact of poverty and the impact of marginalization on somebody's ability to follow the library's rules. And truly, the library is about access. So isn't it better for us to take away some of those rules than to have a rule in place that actually restricts somebody's access to the absolute public free resource that they should have continued access to? So those are the kind of conversations we're having inside, and they're in the organization, and we have made many changes to our policies. In fact, people can walk in and our staff will ask, is this fine standing in the way of you using the library? Because if it is, I'll take it away. We'll take it away. Everybody on the front line has more freedom to do that, understanding that the best outcome for our community comes with somebody using the library often for their whole life, and not worrying about borrowing a book for their child's school project, because what if it doesn't come back, and what if I can't pay the fine? So we're beginning to understand that even some of the foundational structures of our organization need to be dismantled, and that's true of us, and that's true of every organization in our community. If we can look through it with an inclusion lens, if we can make sure that we are reaching outside that circle to draw people in a very intentional way, it actually leads us to interesting decisions and interesting prioritization as a library system.
I like the fact that you touched on the point that you're looking to change your hiring practices, because that's a question that I actually wanted to ask. What percentage of minority do you have in the library? And then what kind of programs do you have in terms of internship and development opportunities for minorities, especially the Black community, and even for the youth? Because I remember that one of the hardest things for me to get into the workforce was the fact that I had no experience. So why would I hire someone? I have all the passion, but the passion doesn't necessarily always translate on experience or being the right fit for certain positions. So how can we offer those opportunities for younger generations so they don't have the same challenges that I'm having? Well, not necessarily now, but that I experience.
Well, you really highlight something, because it is both, the experience is how are you going to get the first job that gives you a reference for the second job, right? That's a big piece of it. And often in our society, we need to acknowledge that it's too often, it's the connections, somebody who knows somebody tells someone about a job, and that means that, certain people seem to just have jobs fall into their lap and other people don't. And so those are the kinds of conversations we need to have. So we've done a number of things. And so we actually have a survey that we're going to be running with our staff that's all ready to go. But we have some staff who are on a short-term leave of absence because of COVID and our budget. So we're going to run it in the fall, and it's going to measure two things. It's going to measure both self-identification of a number of identifying characteristics. So, how many women do we have? How many Black? How many Indigenous? How many people of color? And it will also measure how included those employees feel. So it's two parts, because I think both are important. I don't think we want to be an organization that has, where you tick a box and say, oh, good, we represent the diversity of our community. It is about the kind of workplace we are and how involved people feel and how much they have impact on the decision and shaping the organization. It's not actually about, that's the inclusion piece as opposed to the diversity piece. So that's going to be very interesting to measure. Certainly what I can tell you is, as we've had job postings, we have a really good network within the community that helps to get the word out. So that's for every position. We increasingly see fluency in a language other than English as a very positive benefit. So if you walk into the library, you would actually, you'd actually, if you came in as an Arabic speaker, increasingly we have Arabic speakers in the communities that are being served. We also have have the ability, if it's somebody who isn't at that branch, we can call somebody at another branch and they can help over, over the phone or now a Zoom, which, so we're working on that because I think that's an important piece. We also are looking on a neighborhood basis about how we can best reflect. So we have, when we look for even young people to get involved in shelving the books after school, how do we draw those kids from the neighborhood? Because in fact, that first job that first small time job can lead to the next one. So we're doing it a few ways, but we also have, we are also working actually on some things that will have a positive structure. So I talked about being part of the Canadian Urban Libraries Council. I often work on initiatives with my colleagues across the country. And right now, a group of us are working on creating digital internships, particularly aimed at Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are under the age of 30. So that's currently in the works, but if that program comes into place, that would allow us to bring likely another 8 young people into our organization. And those could be people interested in communications, they could be interested in virtual programming, they could be interested in working with our IT team. It's basically, getting people who have excitement and then embedding them in the organization to pique their interest, to, it may be an internship to begin with, but they get mentorship. We know them. Many people who have come in as interns have come back as employees in our past. So, those are the things that we're trying to do. Sometimes it feels like it takes longer than I want it to. These are, we have a lot of people in our organization who work for us for 20, 25, 30, 35 years. So the turnover in positions isn't so fast, but our intention is, as positions come open, to really, really focus on making sure that we reflect. I actually think as a library, because we are so visible in the community, we can signal a different public institution that can inspire other public institutions to do the same. And what I will say is that this isn't just about doing something good for somebody trying to get into the workforce. It actually changes us. So this is actually where the intelligence and the knowledge and the perspectives come into our organization that actually allow us to better serve the community. So I think it's really important, to understand that many values, the great value that an individual can bring in by being able to even influence me as a CEO and say, well, have you thought about how that policy might affect this community? And have you, here are some connections I have. I think this might be a good community partner. That ability for us to change requires us to invite other perspectives. I hope by the time I retire that the library looks a lot less like me. That would be my goal. And, that makes me really excited. Because I bring one value, but I don't need 400 me's at the table to come up with good decisions. I actually need people who have vision and can see things that might not be immediately clear to me, right? And I also think changing our society, it happens a lot of different ways. We can convene the conversations, but ultimately building leaders and creating opportunities, that's generational shift. And if we can model that, I want our entire society to do that better.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a question that we always have to ask the companies that we work for, or whenever we have a partner in the community. What are you doing to also empower the youth? Because the youth is the next generation, and then older people are stuck on their ways. They're not going to change the way they think a lot of the time. But what are we doing to, make sure that the next generation is going to be better than what we did? And I think that people like you, sometimes you don't need 40 people like you, but just having one person like you that is opening the floor to having these conversations is also very important. So, I don't know.
I think you're right.
Too, right?
Well, I think I have a responsibility to open the door and to invite the conversation. I also have a responsibility to listen, and sometimes that's uncomfortable. You know, you have to be able to listen to people say, well, you know, this was a really great moment and this was maybe a not so great moment. And we can't be afraid of that. We can't be afraid of you know, acknowledging where we misstepped, because otherwise we just keep separate from each other if we think it's going to get uncomfortable. So I think it is important, but your comment about the youth is so important. And, you know, when it's true of all of our branches, but when you look at, when you walk into Central Library, you know, the teens, they have some of the best real estate in that building. They get that front end of the second floor. They can wave at their friends. You know, when I was a teenager and I would go to the library, we were kind of hidden away because there was a risk we might be noisy, and, you know, so they kind of hid us down in, you know, the dark corner. For me, that's the game changer, right? So if we engage youth through the library, we achieve a whole bunch of things. You know, it has a big, big impact on youth mental health. So we have lots of youth who do programs like the Leading Reader program at the library, where teenagers will meet with young children and sit and read with them and help them develop their language skills. We have youth who coordinate cooking programs. So at one of our branches at Dartmouth North, we have teens who come in on a Thursday afternoon and they prepare meals. Like they will prepare, it might be manicotti, or it might be, you know, they prepare really nice, good, delicious, basic food on Thursday afternoon. The library staff put it in the oven on Friday morning, and then all the kids come over from the neighborhood junior high for a hot lunch at the library on Friday. You know, that is really interesting to me because it nourishes the belly, which is important. We all learn and are happier with food. It means the teens are part of addressing some of the challenges, social challenges facing their neighborhood. They do not feel, they feel if they're part of the solution, their mental health improves, they can see a brighter future, they're developing leadership skills, they're getting to know each other. Every child who comes into the library for a hot lunch connects to their public library, which can help them through the rest of their life. Like, there's so many layers to what we do with youth that are about the youth, but it's also showing the youth how they can change their community and they can address the problems and help make things better, which is really important from a mental health perspective for youth. And meanwhile, they're learning how to cook and they can go home and help to feed their own families. And so much of what happens in the library is about that opportunity for growth. And it's also acknowledging that we need to meet people where they're at, right? If food is a fundamental first step to learning, doesn't matter how many great learning programs we have if people can't learn because their belly's empty. So let's do it. Let's teach people about food. Let's share knowledge in different ways. And youth is a big, big focus because, you know, I've met so many young people who have a great vision for how the world can change and be better. And I think organizations like the library need to provide that infrastructure for the great ideas, whether it is, you know, the youth planning a Harry Potter Yule Ball, or whether it's the youth planning the youth drag show, or whether it's cooking clubs, or whether it's tutoring or podcasts or whatever it is. I sort of feel like our job is to just help make it happen, not to make it difficult for it to happen. And I think organizations like the library need to provide that infrastructure for the great ideas, whether it is, you know, the youth planning a Harry Potter Yule Ball, or whether it's the youth planning the youth drag show, or whether it's cooking clubs, or whether it's tutoring or podcasts or whatever it is. I sort of feel like our job is to just help make it happen, not to make it difficult for it to happen. We may have young people who are interested in broadcasting, and so where does their first taste of what it might feel like happen? So there are lots of ways that can happen. We have our shifting to knowledge sharing that isn't knowledge that was written in a book. So our Lou Duggan Creative Studio allows people to share how to make sauerkraut. It allows people to share their knowledge about 3D printing, a whole variety of things. I love the idea of us doing almost like experts in residence, right? If somebody, where does that exposure to all kinds of different medium and other job options and life experiences happen if not in the library? So there could be a youth broadcasting club that broadcasts from the library. I know we have teens at Central Library who do a podcast called It Came from the Second Floor, because that's the youth floor. Sick Boy podcast got its start at the library. We've had some conversations with filmmakers about, wouldn't it be fun to have filmmakers based in the library working? So somebody who might be interested in that industry and that could participate, could understand how it works, could build some connections. So I see this in somewhat the same light. We have knowledge in our community. We have a desire to sort of share it and build understanding. And, the library is a perfect connector place. Understanding, of course, with COVID-19, some of that connecting might, we have to take into account the safe practices. It's a little bit more complicated maybe than it used to be, where people could just drop in and try their hand at something. But I think that, whether there are lots of things that can happen at the library, because we're pretty open to testing that out, right? Particularly if you think about youth and getting youth involved in interviewing and thinking about the questions they want to ask their community could be really lovely.
I do find it's amazing for me to see, like I said, women like you in positions like yours, because I aspire to be a CEO one day. I don't know if it's going to be the library, but I do want to develop myself to be, a leader in my community, and I want to inspire the youth to, achieve amazing things like you have. With that being said, right now it's an important time for the Black community. They need to feel respected and they need to be felt listened to. So how can we be better allies today? Like, what does it mean for you to be an ally, and how can we be an ally to them?
Well, it's something I have to live every day. So even in the past weeks, I've made a point of reaching out individually to many of the Black employees within the library to remind them that their experience and their perspective is important, and to the organization and to me. And that, I will rely on their input and their feedback, and they have an opportunity to shape the organization. I also think it's important that we state publicly how we feel. So very shortly after, I wrote an email to all of our staff at the library and said, we have people within our organization who suffer racism on a daily basis, and we are here to support you, and we are here to help. We've also felt, as a library, I think we have an opportunity to lead people to greater understanding. So if you've been following the library online, we have reading lists, we have, books and ebooks and audiobooks, and prompting people to say, this is not about a momentary trend. We have a responsibility, each of us, to build a deeper understanding of systemic racism and how it has perpetuated in our society, and what the impact is on individuals who are affected by it, and what collective responsibility we have to address it. And that has been really interesting. We've had employees on the radio, on sort of CBC in the morning, saying, here are the books you should read. If there are 5 books to read to just build a deeper understanding, that's important. I also think beyond that, though, my family and I, we walked down and we knelt on Spring Garden Road to show our support. It is so important that we talk across generations, that we challenge the people who may make statements that are racist and just thought that was kind of okay at some time. So it is both a micro and a macro action, right? So if I hear a comment, I won't let that pass, and I will say to somebody, you know what, that phrase or your assumption needs to be revisited, because here are the things that, I think you're a kind person, but what you've just said is extraordinarily disrespectful. So I'm not afraid to call that out as a person. I model that in the young people in my house, and I say, so we all can help to stop that. And then we also then have to think about how we change our institutions for the long term. This is about, this isn't a short-term program. This is about lifting our community up, but it is about changing how we are as employers. It is about reducing those inequalities that disproportionately affect people of color and Black and Indigenous people, that those things can't be anymore. We cannot perpetuate that the people who already have access to education continue to have access to education, and the people who don't. We need to challenge our justice system. We need to challenge our healthcare system. We need to challenge our education systems, and we need to continue to challenge institutions like the public library to make sure that we are not complicit with systemic racism within our community. So it is both how our actions as individuals, and it's our actions as institutions and communities and society that need to change. And so, that's a long answer to a simple question, because it's a complicated situation. Yeah. Right? But it is my great hope, and when I talk about things that are, can last, my great hope is that this lasts, that this changes the tone of the conversation, that we continue to be unrelenting in our care of the collective good, and that we get back to this issue that it's not about me personally thriving, it is about everybody thriving. So what does that look like? And then channel our energy and our resources to reducing the inequities that are absolutely evident in our society, and make this a safe place to grow up as a young Black male, and make it a place of promise. And those are the things that we can't give up on. It's just not okay. We should not be able to go. We should not allow our society to go to a place where they pretend this isn't real. Thank you for having me. I feel so passionately about these things. It's important to pause and talk about them. And I thank you so much for the great questions, and it's been a pleasure.
You as well. Thank you so much. It was a great opportunity, and I feel like community will learn a lot from you and how we can, as individuals, contribute as well.
Yeah, I think it's important. People can be paralyzed sometimes. They worry about what to say.